Matt, thank you very much for including me today. We've been very interested in competency-based resident education at the Board of Surgery, at least for the last 5 or 6 years, and we've slowly made some progress in this area, and I'm just going to sort of bring you up to speed with a little bit of what I've learned over that time period. So it'll have a sort of bigger context than just talking about the current activities at the board. I think I should start by reflecting that these are my own opinions, even though you see the Board of Surgery seal in the corner of many of these things. There's no official position, so these are my thoughts. You know, the paradigm in resident education, as we know, started with the works of this gentleman, and he died nearly a century ago, but his ideas have not died. But in many respects, a lot of the traditions of Hallstedian traditions were training by presence and serendipity. You were in the hospital all the time and you took care of what came in. And that's a wonderful thing, but it doesn't really get us today to where we need to get to, especially as we've contracted some of our presence time, our duty hours time. So the residency redesign efforts at the ABS are basically these. Competency-based education is sort of the cornerstone, and the tool that we've decided to take on to do this is the EPAs, which we then map, as Matt showed you nicely, to milestones and competencies. Entrustment is sort of the concept once competence is achieved. Faculty development is going to be a really key element here, and we'll get to that later. And while not directly related to EPAs, flexibility in the pathway to get to your goal is really kind of a very important facet of understanding competency-based education and the fact that people don't learn in a linear fashion, as Matt has shown with some of these curves. So I'd like to start with sort of a sports analogy because I love sports, and you know, if you think about this, you know, the number of times you would never judge Jordan Spieth's quality for the number of times he swings a club, or the number of times that Shaq gets to the foul line. Does anybody know who's in the baseball player there? Thank you. So good. This is good. This is Hank Aaron. This is probably the best baseball player ever in my mind, and it's not the number of time that Hank Aaron steps to the plate that you judge him by. It's what he does when he swings the bat. So my friend who works for Nike, when I told him about using numbers, he said, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." So anyway, that's where we are. So just a few data points. Laparoscopic Nissen fundoplication, something very dear to my heart. This was a paper that was published in 2005 of the experience in lap Nissens in this country. And actually, it's not too bad, but if you ask experts, when is competency achieved in performing a lap Nissen, there are very few people who will say it's less than 20. So this very small tail of the curve is competent by numbers in lap Nissen. Just take you a little bit down the sordid saga of GI endoscopy training. This was, the RRC put out numbers for training in colonoscopy and EGD in 2009. We still have those numbers, actually. And the GI community said, you know, no way, Jose, that's not enough, right? And so that sort of started a little boxing match, which started in 2011 and culminated in a lot of work by SAGES, by the Board of Surgery, by the SSAT, and actually by the ASGE, although they sort of backed off after a while, to develop a competency-based curriculum, which is known as the flexible endoscopy curriculum. And that's linked to a SAGES SAGES test called the Fundamentals of Endoscopic Surgery. And if are there any residents in the room? One resident. Great. I hope you've taken your have you taken FES yet? Okay, you'll have to take it soon. Joe and I will be talking about this, but currently it is mandated for ABS certification by 2018, and this criteria passed the ABS unanimously in 2013. So we thought we were in a pretty good place as far as the ASGE. but round 2 has just started, and because, again, the numbers have been cranked up by the ASGE, and they're very stuck on numbers. And I think we're going to have to develop some sort of statement that, again, articulates our belief in competency and not numbers. And this talk is all about that. So more data. This is a paper that I really like that came out in the BGS last year that really discusses the intersection of competency-based education and case numbers. And what this paper showed was that a minimum number of index procedures, and we all have minimums, case minimums set by the RRC, did not reflect competence in a significant proportion of trainees. And if you look at this summary statement here, more than half of all assessments performed after the trainees had completed their numbers were scored below level 4, and level 4 is independent. So half of the time when they've met their numbers, they weren't actually deemed competent. And here's the data that goes with it. This is cholecystectomy. It's a little complex here, but just focus on level 4, which is the level of independence, unsupervised performance of cholecystectomy. Only 8 of 32 residents actually achieved that level. And the threshold at which 95% had reached independence was somewhere close to 200. 50%, the mean score was just a little less than 100, and you can see the median there is somewhere around 60 cases. Interestingly, though, here is the fact that the range is so broad that one resident was deemed proficient, it would appear, with 2 or 3 cases, and at 300 was another one. So there's an incredible breadth. 8 of 52 reached independence in segmental colectomy. 7 of 36 residents reached independence in Hartman's procedure. So again, these are individuals finishing their residency program in Leeds. So if we agree that individuals learn at different rates, achieve competence with different amounts of experience, focusing on the numbers is dangerous and wrong. So let's get into EPAs, and I think that Dr. Ritter has covered a lot of this, so I'm going to move pretty fast through this so I can get to what we're doing at the board. So EPA is a unit of professional practice that can be fully entrusted to a trainee as soon as he or she has demonstrated the necessary competence to execute this activity unsupervised. That's of course quoted from Ole ten Cate, who's the father of EPAs from the Netherlands. And EPAs are really holistic. It's the whole unit of practice, and so this is the old competencies are sort of reductionistic by comparison. EPAs translate competencies into clinical practice. Competencies are descriptors of physicians. EPAs are descriptors of work. That's why they're so appealing. EPAs usually require multiple competencies in an integrative, holistic manner. So this is just an example of how milestones, several milestones over the course of a residency lead to one competency, several competencies lead to an EPA. And again, Dr. Ritter talked a little bit about mapping. This is another way to look at mapping in a sort of a grid fashion. You can take the competencies, spread them across the top, take an EPA, such as performing an appendectomy, and you can see that that maps to medical knowledge, patient care, and then you can look down this list and see how those map. Now, again, you've looked at these curves, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but these are the different competency curves that Dr. Ritter showed. I wanted to bring one point forward, though, which is this curve here. So what happens if you reach competence, reach entrustment during your training? What if you're ready for unsupervised practice before you're finished with your residency? And ideally, we would grant that individual the opportunity to do independent practice, and in some countries and in some settings, we do that. In the United States, it's difficult because in order to bill for that procedure, the attending surgeon needs to be in the room, and therefore just the mere presence of the individual in the room at some level and participation in the critical parts of the case limits the independence of the trainee. So the question that we're wrestling with at the board is, in your last year of residency or in your fellowship, is there an opportunity to not only create the entrustment decision, but create the legal framework whereby an individual could bill and therefore truly be independent with help nearby in the next operating room or something like that. So I think many of you know Jaap Bonnier, but Jaap, would you put up your hand if you, so Jaap Bonnier is chair of surgery in Amsterdam, VUMC, and he's developed a fabulous method of competency-based residency education in his institution, and Frank Lewis and John Mellinger and I visited it last year about this time. I think Jaap's giving the Marx lecture tomorrow, so please go hear the Marx lecture, because this will be much better than what you're hearing right now. What they have done is they've taken procedures and mapped them across the continuum of education and determined what level one should be at various level of training. And so, as you can see here, for a second-year residence, it's expected that they will be ready to independently care for a perianal abscess and require some assistance with inguinal hernia and be fairly a little bit lower down the scale in lap chole. Did I just turn this thing off? I tried to advance it. There we go. PGY4, independent in hip fracture, small bowel resection, and lap chole, and be able to teach an inguinal hernia, the level E, and a vascular surgeon who is in their 6th year of training, again, expected to be independent in these two areas, carotid and aortic, iliac, and able to teach the last 3 cases. So as we leave the Netherlands and come back to the U.S., we have a sort of different problem in the U.S., and that is that we have a lot of stakeholders who are interested in education, which is great, but it means that any one group working by itself is unlikely to be successful. So the 4 major stakeholders, as we saw it at the Board of Surgery, was the ACS, which creates educational programs and accredits educational institutes, the ACGME and its RRC, which is responsible for residencies and accreditation of residency programs. The American Board of Surgery is responsible for certifying competent surgeons and therefore has a big stake in this. And the Association for Program Directors in Surgery, or the APDS, which Dan Dent is either the president or past president, so thank you very much for coming, Dan, is very fundamentally engaged and involved with this project as well. So where are we on this journey? The players here, this project is being chaired by Karen Brazel, who's our program director in Oregon and on the executive committee of the Board of Surgery. Mary Klingensmith is the incoming chair of the board after myself. We've used as consultants primarily Bob Englander and Rebecca Minter, but Ole Tenkate has been helpful at the outset, as has Eric Holmbo from the ACGME. We've engaged these 4 societies, the APDS, ACS, RRC, and we've created a steering committee, which will also be the reactor panel for the first set of EPAs, and an EPA writing committee. So progress to date, the first workshop was held in Philadelphia in June 2016, where the steering committee was put together. At the last steering committee meeting, which was held in January, we chose 5 EPAs to start working on. And it's anticipated, by the way, that we won't have 45 or 50 EPAs, but somewhere around 20 EPAs is kind of where we're thinking. So we're taking very big global things, not how to, the act of closing an incision, but it's the act of taking care of a patient with an inguinal hernia, evaluating and managing a patient with gallbladder disease, right lower quadrant pain, trauma, resuscitating a trauma patient, and general surgery consultation. So these are the 5 that we're starting, and we really stayed a little away from just purely technical exercises, in part because we never want the surgeon to be thought of purely as a technician, and secondly, when you go to see a surgeon, you're much more interested in their ability to make the diagnosis, to explain the operation to you, to do the operation, to care for you after, to take care of your complications, to explain it to your family, and et cetera. So there's a whole lot more to it than just doing the operation for each one of these areas. The first writing session was held just a few weeks ago in Philadelphia, and the groups, dyads, got together, and they're in the process, or the Delphi process, of refining those 5 EPAs right now. The next steps are that when they're happy with them, they're going to bring it back to the steering committee, which is the first reactor panel. Of course, then we'll expect it to be revisions after we look at it. And a second reactor panel will be chosen, which will probably include a lot of program directors and teaching faculty in academic and community programs. Mapping is going to be important. It's maybe less important in some other countries, but where we have these ACGME milestones and competencies, in order for us to think about how these would interrelate, we will perform a mapping exercise that Matt discussed. There'll be some pilot sites. We're looking for a wide variety of residency types, from small community hospitals to large academic facilities, and a broad geographic spread. And then faculty development is going to be absolutely critical in doing, before we get into the use of the EPAs, because faculty development and how to assess is fundamental if the assessment is going to be accurate. I'll say it in a different sort of way. Once faculty development, once individuals are trained to assess, they actually have very little inter-observer variability. Untrained, the inter-observer variability is huge. So all of this might leave a program director on a good day looking like this. So that sort of leads to one of the last points, which is that I think we're committed to faculty development as well as to developing these, because we understand that specialized skills are required to teach and evaluate learners. It's likely that not every person on a teaching service will be an evaluator. Generally, it's felt that you have to have at least 3 assessments of competence before you reach an entrustment decision, or a STAR, as Matt called it. But those individuals have to be trained to do a good job at it. So I'm just going to summarize with just a few points. So established case numbers do not map to attainment of competence for the majority of trainees. I hope you're convinced of that by now. I've been extraordinarily convinced over time, and even more so now. Competence-based resident education offers the opportunity to accredit trainees for independent practice as they proceed through training, which would be a wonderful thing if we're allowed to do that. EPAs provide a comprehensive tool for competency-based resident education, and the ABS is engaged with the RRC, the APDS, and the ACS in piloting competency-based resident education using EPAs. So thank you very much for your attention. Happy later to answer some questions. Thanks.